Hi, I'm Brad, and this is VR, AR, XR news that I care about, also known as Viramarakcha. Last week I said I wouldn't do videos unless I thought there was a lot of interesting stuff that was going on. And yeah, a day before that happened, an entire bombshell of a week kind of just came over me. And a lot of new interesting things was kind of just either announced or leaked or kind of given away by industry insiders. It was to the point where I realized, yeah, this might be a very long video. I'm not really sure, but I have to explain a lot of different things, to the best of my ability, of course. Be sure to check out the chapters for this video if you are only interested in certain topics. Or watch the whole thing and give me more ad money. But the first thing we're going to start with this week is really talking about this thing. Or, well, what this thing kind of is supposed to be representing. The Steam Deck launched last Friday. I did not get in the first wave, which sucks. But I'm sure it's a matter of time. Right? And in typical Valve fashion, we have a bunch of silence, but when a product announces or releases, we get a huge dump of interviews and really just communication from the company. And that communication comes in the form of Gaben, or Gabe Newell, the CEO of Valve. In my hand here are a few sort of tidbits I really want to go over because he actually talks about really not just the Steam Deck, but the future of the device and really the category that they're trying to create with these low power mobile APUs. He also gives a lot of hints to what Valve is really interested in for their next VR XR projects. And yeah, obviously this channel, if you're watching this channel, you're probably already aware that I'm obsessed with that garbage. So to really strike home to people that yeah, Valve is still interested in VR and anyone that says they're not is kind of as insane as me, but in different ways. I'm just gonna read these quotes and sort of give my little consensus of what they mean, at least the way I see them. And I see everything. The first interview comes from Edge Magazine asking about what the future of the deck devices will lead to. And Newell said he already knew where he wants to take things. The first step is to allow you to play great games that exist today. The second iterations are going to be more about what are the capabilities that mobile give us. Above and beyond, what would you get in a traditional desktop or laptop gaming environment? He gives the example of computer vision, a technology with which Valve is experimenting for VR, but which could be implemented on a future iteration of deck. Before I continue on, if you don't know what computer vision is, that's basically the idea of using cameras or other data related to actually seeing the real world. It's how Oculus sort of maps out the inside out markerless tracking system for whatever they're doing, and how a lot of companies are also doing AR through VR pass through with cameras as well to overlay things in the environment. Even Snapchat filters, which are getting more complex as time goes on, you can even count that as a way of computer vision. Other types of computer vision are also sort of things that would be able to map out cars on a highway for a smart car and kind of decide where the car should be able to drive or change lanes. Those are all the things that kind of constitute computer vision. We already knew that Valve is experimenting with computer vision for VR. They partnered with a company known as Arcturus Vision, who is likely helping them with their own inside out markerless tracking system. They also made the Room View 3D, which, if you use an index, you probably never used Room View 3D unless you're kind of crazy or weird, but yeah, they did make that. Continuing on with the quote, Edge Magazine notes that the sharing of the technologies is a two-way street at Valve, which means things that they're working on for VR can also incorporate into non-VR projects and back and forth. Gabe Newell mentions one of the things Deck represents is a battery-capable, high-performance horsepower PC that eventually you could use in VR applications as well. You can take the PC and build something that's a lot more transportable. We're not really there yet, but this is a stepping stone. I think that's pretty self explanatory. Again, I've been saying for a while, and even Valve former employees last year kind of hinted at the idea that, yeah, an x86 deck mobile platform sort of chip could power a standalone VR headset at some point. My core belief that right now Valve might be looking into using an x86 chip as sort of an accessory at first, but later on, when the technology gets better, yeah, it'll be fully integrated into a sort of headset, like a deck or two, maybe. All right, two more interviews. Again, if you are not interested in this stuff, skip on to the next chapter. He also did another interview with Eurogamer. It was just more questioning about what the actual idea of using the hardware could be do for future products, and this is what Gabe Newell had to say here. Gabe Newell says, "You know all of these things relate to each other, right? A lot of the technology that we might be using in future versions that come, from technology that we have to develop for VR, and then if you flip it around and you look at that like as a highly performant mobile PC gaming device, You sort of say, well, why can't I have that in a tetherless integrated VR solution? With headsets, you have a lot more ability to do things like neuromodulation or with direct sensors and stuff on people's heads. Or you're looking at information that's easy to convey through sensors close to someone's hands. All these things tend to snowball over time, and with each one of them, we think, what are we going to learn? What are we going to help software developers do, and how does that translate into building compelling solutions for games? I have a video talking about a project that Valve is also heavily involved in with a company known as OpenBCI. It's called Project Gaia. It's basically a bunch of EMG and other sensors that could actually work together to sort of form an idea of what the player emotionally might be feeling. Valve has a bunch of patents to be able to use that data not only to actually get sort of good playtesting data, but the idea is in the long term, keyword long term, consumers would be able to attach these head straps that can modulate and detect what you're feeling and actually slowly change gameplay over time to better make the experience more tailored for that player. One of those sensors in those headsets, by the way, is eye tracking. So that's another reason why eye tracking is very important and why I've always pushed for it in headsets like this one, or at least its counterpart or sequel. Random rant, I am using this headset more often because VRChat's OSC allows me to do eye and face tracking finally. But this thing, the microphone's garbage. Ugh. Anyway, longer term, we may end up finding that there are interesting mobile specific opportunities. If you start putting cameras on these things, you may find that there are classes of game experiences that are really dependent on those. Pokemon Go is a great example of an application that doesn't make sense in any way for desktop. If you don't know what Pokemon Go is, obviously it's an AR or AR app that relies on mobile phone with camera using computer vision. Well, actually, really, the computer vision side of things is very lackluster. It's more about sort of using the actual mobile experience and cameras to sort of overlay Pokemon into a digital environment. People have been using Pokemon Go as a great example as AR for a while, and it is kind of where things are going in terms of mixed reality devices as well. It's pretty likely that whatever VR and XR headsets that come from Valve in the future will also incorporate cameras. In fact, that's kind of one of the things that they've been wanting to work on for a while, and I know that a lot of employees at Valve are also interested in AR. Some of them have been interested in AR since they started working at the hardware team at Valve, but really the AR side was kind of lagging behind the VR stuff due to technology and limitations and really what they thought they should be focusing on. VR is a much more tangible hardware thing to accomplish than AR right now, which we'll get into later when I talk about the next topics. Now we have one more sort of quote and interview question. I really enjoy this. This is from Rock Paper Shotgun. Basically, Rock Paper Shotgun was asking why the Steam Deck seems to be so targeted for the low-end market or really trying to be more affordable, while the Valve Index and anything they've done for VR seems to be targeting the enthusiast and high-end, and whether that would change in the future. I've had a lot of people worried when I start giving speculations about Deckard having standalone capabilities, that they would start thinking that Valve is giving up the enthusiast grade and wants to target more of the Quest 2 grade. Let me just put it down on record, I never believed that they would be trying to compete with the Quest 2 grade of the lower end and always would try to be targeting the enthusiast because that's kind of how Valve operates for VR. You don't see Valve creating even software experiences for VR that would be like the low common denominator that would be runnable on Quest. They create a masterpiece called Half-Life Alyx, and their hardware is high-end stuff that most enthusiast people that really get into the PC VR platform have a capability to do things such as full body tracking and have a lot more open platforms to do attachments such as what you see on the right of me. Valve sees PCVR as a benefit due to its openness and allowing people to do whatever they want, and they're much more likely to be the enthusiast category, while also the Quest 2s that are also sold at a loss or at least sold near cost, they have the support for those headsets to plug into their Steam ecosystem. So in a way, what is the point for Valve to compete with a low-end device when Facebook, even if Valve did release a low-end device, Facebook could just lower the price or even undercut other companies forever. Everyone has a lot of different opinions on that, but my idea is a more healthy ecosystem is being able to sell at low-end, mid-end, and high tier for really the entire hardware industry. And Gabe Newell agrees. He says, when we look at VR, we still continue to believe that the challenge is really building the most sufficiently compelling experience. It was more important with Index to build the best possible experience, and in fact, we still think it needs to improve on really basic things in terms of ergonomics, visual fidelity, quality of tracking, and so on. Whereas for the handheld gaming device, traditionally that's been a much more price-sensitive category. The critical thing wasn't to expand radically the definition of what PC gaming was. The critical thing was, in a price-efficient way, to deliver that experience to a mobile audience. So you're correct in pointing out that they were targeted at different goals, and that's because of the segments that we're going to be operating in. It was, I think, in retrospect, probably not as critical to hit the price point, talking about the low end of the Steam Deck. I think we obsessed about it very hard, and then people who pre order it are all buying the most expensive SKU, way more than we expected. So the signal that we're getting from customers is that they would have preferred, I mean, not preferred, we're definitely selling a lot of the entry level SKU, but if you'd asked me, I would have thought it was 60% to 70% of what we're going to be the low end SKU, and it's sort of reversed. So it's kind of difficult, and even Gabe Newell says that after the fact of this quote, that most pre-orders are actually ordering the high-end version of the Steam Deck for the more memory and really the lightly small better capabilities, such as the screen that has a more anti-glare coating on it. And that's like 60 to 70% of the pre-orders so far. Now he also mentions that yeah, these pre-orders are going to tend to be the early adopters and the more enthusiast people, so maybe that will leverage out over time, but they're basically saying whatever VR headset we come out with, we still think that they should be targeting the high end, or at least stuff that solves all the problems to make a overall compelling device. So now no matter what headset Valve comes out with next, do not worry, they are not sort of undercutting features to just give a cheap device out. They will also probably be doing the sort of thing with Index where they target a high-end enthusiast level and give a high-end enthusiast level hardware system. I know it seems like my speculations on Deckard or Valve's next VR project changes a bit, and that's kind of just the way this works. Valve is very silent, and SteamVR has not really had a sufficiently big update since the last time I've done an update on it. But I actually decided I'm going to be creating a VR chat world, sort of like a museum, where I can actually update and sort of give 3D models or renders of what I believe a next headset from a bunch of different companies could incorporate, and based on the research I kind of put together. I originally thought it'd be interesting to have a website to keep people up to date with that, but I think a VR chat world, based to this being a sort of VR focused channel, would be a lot more immersive and interesting. So that's everything related to the Valve Steam Deck and everything related to their next VR projects and quotes I found related to VR from Gabe Newell during this huge info dope and press embargo lifts. Yeah. Now this next segment I'm about to be talking about is an overwhelming amount of information. I'm sorry in advance, but it's just very fascinating, and you might be able to learn a lot because I did some research, and while there's some of these topics I'm not fully understanding, I can at least give the bare minimum details to explain each thing. But ET News, also known as Korean IT News, had a big update or sort of info dump of what their sort of industry and supply chain sources have given them info on 4 different companies working on metaverse devices. Those 4 companies include Apple, Samsung, Meta, and Microsoft. They're all working on their AR VR devices. We also know that Google and other companies in the Chinese scene are also working on metaverse devices, but we're going to focus on those 4 for now based on this article. This article goes on to say exactly what kind of technologies they want to use, including display technology, and sort of hints to what lenses they might use as well, including what kind of SoCs you might expect to see and what operating systems you will also definitely see in these headsets when they release. These headsets are all slated to pretty much release within the next couple years as well. So let's go ahead and see what they have to say, and I'll try to give explanations for each technology they bring up and yada yada yada. They say Samsung and Apple are competing for the metaverse device market. Meta, which runs Facebook, and Microsoft are expected to compete as well. Partner companies in the parts industry of the big tech are disclosing their outlines. The part industry expects Apple to release a VR headset terminal for the metaverse market as early as this year. It has been understood that the performance test for the VR headset production has been recently completed. My video from last week pretty much goes into detail about that. Basically, there was a EVT or engineering verification test prototype that actually passed all of Apple's strict verification, which shows good progress for the device. I also kind of find it funny this first paragraph also just kind of lumps Meta in with all these other companies rather than like saying, yeah, they're a dominating force right now. We should all fear them. Apple should fear them. But no, there's another company that's going to be in the huge range of devices coming from these 4 mega corporations. Apple VR devices are equipped with micro-organic light-emitting diodes, known as Micro-OLED displays or OLED microdisplays. Apple cooperated with Taiwan's TSMC with developing these displays for VR devices. Now, they go on to say this, but I'm going to sort of re-explain it after because it's not completely true. But ET News says micro OLED displays do not require color filters since OLEDs are deposited directly on the chip wafer. Again, we'll get into that after I read the rest of the paragraph, but that last sentence, yeah. Micro OLED is smaller, thinner, and more efficient. The VR headset application processor will be applied with an M1 chip, which is Apple's self-developed system on a chip, and an operating system will be running something similar to iOS. It's been leaked that the iOS is going to be called Reality OS for their XR devices. They've been working on this Reality OS since at least back since 2017, which is a long time ago. That's 5 years ago. Really, Apple's been working on XR devices prototypes for even longer than that, but yeah, it seems like they're finally about to actually release something. Which whenever Apple releases something, that's when things get pretty crazy for the entire industry, so that alone makes me excited. People will take the VR and AR devices more seriously than a gaming console toy because I'm sure Apple is not going to be completely focused on gaming. But again, they said that micro OLED does not require color filters. That was a very strange thing to read from this publication because that is not really true. In fact, my biggest complaint with micro OLED up until this point is that most micro OLED displays that have existed up until now actually do use color filters. And that's why they've not been very suitable for mass producing for a lot of VR headsets because you usually pair micro OLED headsets with some sort of type of pancake lens system. The issue with these pancake lens systems, even though they make assemblies a lot thinner and can, over time, with a lot of sort of tweaking of major corporations, they can apply much better quality on sort of PPD in your actual visual periphery. But the issue with these is they polarize the light and also bounce light back and forth. And during this whole process, you actually lose a lot of the light, also known as nits or candelas per meter square, in the process of the display going through the lens into your eyes. And a lot of these micro OLED displays were not able to get bright enough to have a good enough 200 nits or average to the eye, which is what you kind of need. The main reason was a lot of these OLEDs would use white OLED, which basically it's just white OLED, and they pretty much stack these little color filters on top to get the red, green, blue emitted from those white OLED. But the color filters were very inefficient, not only in terms of just like actually removing 70% of the actual usable light. Companies would try to get past this by dual stacking the actual white OLED to get sort of more brightness and then stack the RGB OLED color filters on top. But by doing that, you kind of ruin the idea of actually having a much lower battery cost with these displays. Because with these micro OLED displays, one reason I love them so much and think they're very beneficial for VR especially, is they have a very low response time, like 0.1 milliseconds. And they also are very low power and really have great colors and just a lot of benefits to them. But again, they were not useful for consumer devices because the color filters remove most of the light. You pair them with a pancake optic system, and yeah, you just don't get any lights to your retinas, which is just everything looks dark and dim, especially in bright environments. From headsets I've tried, I can report that for sure. But in previous videos, I've talked about a company who actually works for the US military and has been for a while. They produce micro OLED systems for a lot of different applications, and they recently, in like the last decade, produced a micro OLED design that actually gets rid of color filters and also actually allows direct patterning, which basically, instead of having white OLED with those color filters on top, they actually make red, green, blue subpixels that actually give off their own colored light. So that removes the color filters and allows them to get high brightness with the micro OLED. So Apple is cooperating with TSMC to make these displays. Now, what I'm also curious about that is, I know Apple is working with TSMC at least to get the wafers, because another thing about micro OLED is they're very different than standard OLED because they're built onto silicon wafers. The actual OLED is on the silicon wafer rather than a normal glass backplane. And Apple using TSMC makes a lot of sense. We kind of knew that would always happen, but what this makes it sound like is that TSMC might be getting interested in actually producing OLED displays themselves. Not just like the actual wafer production, but maybe looking to get into the display industry, which would be a big opportunity for them. TSMC is like the largest and most well-known silicon wafer production facility, and since that a lot of XR devices are looking to use micro displays which rely on silicon wafers, TSMC can use this opportunity to also get in the display business completely. They hired a bunch of people in the actual display industry from really Korea, Japan, and China to sort of get there, and they have a very top secret facility, not only working on micro OLED, but with something called micro LED. It's kind of like micro OLED, but instead of OLED, it's using inorganic materials. That's for a whole other day. You can tell I really like OLED microdisplays since I probably spent like 3 minutes talking about that. Yeah. Now they also talk about Samsung here. Apparently Samsung Electronics is coordinating the release of a metaverse device. Samsung will be introducing an AR device which applied a hologram technology. We'll explain what that might mean in a little bit. There's bunch of options, and I did some extra research to kind of give some opinions of what that may entail. Samsung will use Exynos SoC for the AR device and have Android for the OS. Samsung is closely co-developing technology with DigiLens. It is reported that Samsung Electronics has completed development of a prototype and is deciding the release date. So that's pretty big. They kept that pretty quiet, I gotta admit. The interesting thing about that quote is it even this week there's an event going on called MWC, which stands for Mobile World Conference. And the basically leaders at that conference from Samsung even said this, that fans should look forward to the launch of their metaverse device since they are working really hard, and that is important to raise the quality of the product to the highest standards. So those are some pretty big words and makes it sound like, yeah, we might see that device within a year or so, which would be crazy. Now, I gotta admit, AR devices are kind of not my forte. I've always been very skeptical of this sort of clear glass AR devices getting really useful for consumers anytime soon, which is why you see a lot of consumer companies like Apple switching to AR through VR pass through, using cameras and VR, just like Cambria's plan to be, to achieve this AR design. The whole tiny form factor glasses that can do all the computing and overlaying of images and games and everything, we're not really close to that. But ET News says that Samsung is using a hologram technology, and yeah, what does that even mean? It can mean a lot of different things, but here's some of my ideas. First, we have to talk about DigiLens. If you don't know this company, this is another company that used to do a lot of its top secret stuff for the US military. You'll notice that a lot of companies that do stuff for the military, they eventually will get into the consumer market somehow, and this DigiLens company is definitely one of them. In 2019, DigiLens actually received a massive series combining funding from Samsung and UDC. UDC stands for Universal Display Company. Why am I bringing them up? Well, UDC actually has a big partnership with Samsung. What UDC does is they actually license their OLED technology to Samsung, and they also supply a lot of the sort of materials for OLED devices. Basically, the little red, green, blue organic materials that would go into the deposition process. And they both, again, funded DigiLens a lot in 2019, and Samsung is reported to be working with DigiLens closely for all their devices. And that includes the device that they're working on with Microsoft, which we'll get into in a little bit. Anyway, back to DigiLens. So DigiLens, what they do is make holographic waveguides. Waveguides allow light to bounce through from a light engine into the lenses that would be in front of your eyes for sort of clear, basically clear lenses. Do a lot of stuff with AR, and they're also known to be in a lot of sort of when air pilots for the military, they would use these little waveguides to display information, such as a heads-up display or anything. Yeah, they just do the lens side of things, basically. But what DigiLens on the consumer side is very good at doing is making waveguides and lenses with these holographic photopolymers. These are known as Bragg gratings. These Bragg gratings are basically, you freeze a liquid crystal type material onto lenses, and you can even layer these on top of each other to get more benefits and sort of functionality. That layering of these different Bragg gratings is called volume Bragg gratings. And this is where the whole holographic lenses kind of come in. If you ever heard the term holographic lenses, you might hear it more and more as time goes on. Yeah, it's just, again, layering these sort of pre-chosen, pre-designed photopolymer liquid crystal designs on top of clear glass or plastic lenses. Some of these formats can allow better efficiency, enable full color RGB displays with a larger field of view, and even embedding in individual prescription values is the big one for these use cases. So if you have something like myopia, they can sort of embed your myopia level directly into the lenses. So when you get the product, you're good to go. But when you get to something even more intense, it's called switchable Bragg gratings, which basically those different layers can also have a voltage applied to each one. And if you combine those voltages together for each layer, you can do stuff such as varifocal, which I've talked about a lot. If you remember Imagine Optics, I did a lot of topics about that. a company that Valve funded a long time ago to sort of do a lot of research with this stuff like varifocal lenses. Meta also has shown off sort of this switchable gratings and liquid crystal geometric phase lenses to also achieve varifocal. It's just a very common thing the industry is fully aware of, and a lot of companies are pursuing it. Interesting thing to note with these waveguides is they can apply for a huge variety of light engines, such as OLED, LCOS, which stands for liquid crystal and silicon, and micro-LED whenever that gets useful. But yeah, industry leaders basically expect that Samsung is going to release some sort of AR transparent glass. Again, I'm very skeptical about how useful this glass will be to sort of a VR or MR product in terms of functionality. But maybe it'll do well, especially when you can kind of pair the device with a smartphone from the Samsung ecosystem. But they're using a Exynos chip built in already, so I really just doubt they're going to be doing something like that. I don't know, I could be wrong. I should also note that Samsung has filed a lot of patents related to sort of different holographic materials and holographic displays. The most interesting one to me was they were actually patenting OLED displays or OLED micro displays with a metal layer, mirror reflective layer in the actual manufacturing process. So instead of having a separate geometric phase lens on top, they can actually build a display or micro display with the geometric phase built in, which that blows my mind. It's way beyond my pay grade, but wow. This stuff's getting crazy, guys. I can't tell you enough how interesting this stuff is to me. So yeah, that's just Samsung's own device, but Samsung's also working with Microsoft to develop Microsoft's next AR VR product. Microsoft is also developing its own smart glasses together with Samsung applied with the hologram technology, but instead of Exynos chip, they are going to be equipped with a Qualcomm chip. We actually kind of knew this because in CES 2022, which is this year, I think. Where am I? Qualcomm actually did note that, yeah, they partnered with Microsoft to make custom chips for Microsoft's AR platform. So it makes sense that Microsoft seems to be partnering with Samsung and Qualcomm to do their own device here. People have called it like a HoloLens 3, but it might be something completely different again because it seems like every company do want to make a MR device seriously more than these sort of devices we see only for the enterprise category, which is useful, but now let's talk about Meta, formerly Facebook, Oculus, whatever you want to call them. A lot of companies died under that name. So this one made me happy. Meta is working hard to preoccupy the metaverse device market and is developing a new metaverse hardware equipped with micro-OLED displays, Qualcomm chips, and a Google Android OS, which pretty much is the same thing. The only thing different here is they're working on a headset with a micro-OLED display. If you actually follow my Twitter, I actually reported that back in January that they were working on the device after Cambria, and they were getting sort of supply lines and plans set together and deals made to actually be able to build enough micro-OLED displays for whatever comes after Cambria. Cambria will not have micro-OLED displays. They seem to be focused on using mini-LED, which I guess makes sense because they've been kind of going that route. And, Cambria's been in production and pre-production for a few years now. So those deals for that display with Sharp and I think it was another company, Japan Display Company, which will be the suppliers of that display. So deals are made for that. Cambria is set in stone, and we don't even know if Cambria is going to have a new chip because they are working on a custom chip apparently with Qualcomm, is what I've heard from my Chinese and Asian sources. So yeah, micro-OLED is taking over, is what I'm trying to say, guys. I'm very bullish on that technology. It's a great display type. We just gotta get it in every device we can, so the cost comes down. Finally, the official from the parts industry said the metaverse device market is expected to grow an annual rate of 80% and emerge as a new market following smartphones. The parts and equipment industry is also making everything to become a partner, or risking everything to become a partner. Sorry. It's not only about Meta anymore, is what I've been trying to say for a while. All these companies are feeling like now is the moment to hop in. The technology is finally there for everyone to release a device that they think consumers will actually care about. It's not going to be just gaming consoles and these sort of giant shells of a headset. They're all going to have very special features, specialized ecosystems, and there's going to be a lot more competition, which is good for everyone. What's interesting about this comment is all these part industry makers are also getting in line, trying to make deals with these huge OEM companies And that's really a good sign because usually before a lot of companies would have to really try hard to come to these parts manufacturers and pretty much beg them that, hey, we really want this new technology that would be great for VR AR devices. But these parts manufacturers would normally be like, yeah, but what kind of volumes are you seeing for unit sales and everything? And then we'd be like, oh, we're getting like 1 million a year. And they'd be like, we're not gonna create new supply lines for that new technology that would probably boost even more sales. It was like a chicken and egg thing, but we're seeing a huge change in that right now. So yeah, that pretty much covers everything that ET News reported about and all my opinions based on that. Again, it was a lot of information. Sorry for the overload, but I all think it was very interesting stuff and very important. And yeah, I like where things are headed for sure. Now, last week I also talked about China. A lot of Chinese companies, including ByteDance, which I said ByteDance bought Pico, and they were making huge investments in hiring. Well, literally this week at Mobile World Conference in Spain, Qualcomm had a short sort of overview of what they've been working on recently. Not too much new information, but they did announce that they partnered with Pico or ByteDance, creators of TikTok, to actually supply chips and software for any Pico devices from the future. Pretty much like every other company, Qualcomm's doing very well in the XR market. They're partnered with Meta, they're partnered with Microsoft, they're partnered with ACC. I mean, even Valve's leaked sort of SteamOS 3 references to Deckard show that there was a Qualcomm chip involved working together with an x86 device of some sort. Qualcomm's doing well, and they'll probably continue doing well in this market, even though they are reportedly terrible to work with, and there's NDAs all over the place, so it sucks for me. So I'm trying to find more interesting stuff about what they're working on. NDAs everywhere. Yeah. Not much else to say about that, but yeah, just Chinese, East, West, Europe, big market right now. Keeps getting huger every day. Now, before I was talking about micro OLED and kind of explaining the issues with micro OLED and why it hasn't become like big in commercial and consumer uses, the big issue is brightness, right? Well, I have a lot of people asking me recently, what about quantum dot technology for micro OLED? You are seeing Samsung and LG kind of getting really interested in, I think it was Samsung and Sony releasing TVs with a technology known as QD-OLED, which is basically OLED, but instead of having white OLED, they would have, I believe, what was blue OLED, and they would have quantum dots on top to transfer that blue OLED to red and green, while also keeping the blue OLED, which is already bright. And it would give way better efficiency, way better quality. Just all in all, it was a great technology. And people kept asking me, well, that QD OLED, couldn't you put quantum dots in micro displays? And the answer I've been telling people is up until this point, scaling down quantum dots to a very microscopic nanometer level has been very hard, like near impossible. So these micro display companies weren't really exploring it much. Well, that's kind of changed. There was some new news that was really not reported on by anyone, but I wanted to kind of show it off. A Chinese company known as SmartVision announced that they are making a micro QDEL products using full HD silicon-based backplanes with a resolution of 5648 ppi. They're just tiny displays for like a smart glass, basically, when you get to PPIs that small or large. And are the world's first electroluminescent silicon-based quantum dot products. Again, its advantages is high luminous efficiency, high tuning accuracy, narrow light emission peak. It can achieve high saturation, wide color gamut, yada yada yada. It's just better than a lot of the other displays we have right now, even better than OLED. But it's still a very immature technology, and the difference between this and QD OLED is this is not a color conversion micro display, from what I understand. This is a self-emitting quantum dot display, which is even further further in the future. I believe they call it they recently started calling it nano LED, which is not to be confused with another name. Basically, displays have so many marketing names that it's ridiculous. If you ever heard of something called QLED, which is quantum dot based mini LED, which is also sounds like OLED, so people think they're buying an OLED TV when they buy a Samsung QLED. It's not OLED at all, and it's all over the place. Anyway, QDEL or nano LED, it's a mess, but very cool progress. Except from this display, it seems they've only really gotten red working, and that's kind of been the issue with these self-emitting quantum dot electroluminescent displays is getting blue. It's always blue. Getting blue to work has been a problem for these self-elusive quantum dot displays, but still very freaking cool, and I love progress. Now, finally, a lot of people keep asking me about this device, even though I don't think the news is that interesting. The only reason I'm going to cover it is for a complaint or some murmuring I've heard recently, some rumors of release date, but we'll get to that in a minute. Last week, PlayStation VR 2 was shown off its final design. Likely its design validation test. Again, I've talked about that in my last video, news video, what that means. But yeah, they've shown off what the actual controllers and headset will look like when it gets into consumers' hands. A lot of complaints about the wire placement and the fact that you can't remove the wire. Yeah, that kind of sucks, especially if you're worried about repairs or replacing the wire, because wires are like the first thing to usually go in these kind of headsets. But I don't know, I don't really have much to say about the design. It's very Gore-Tex inspired, which Gore-Tex is a manufacturer. They also give reference designs to companies, and companies work with them to make very easily mass-producible headsets. And yeah, it looks very similar to a lot of other headsets you would see on the market. Has 4 cameras for its inside-out markerless tracking, and doesn't have built-in audio. I'm guessing that they want people to buy their special headphones or use their TVs in their living rooms, since people are mostly going to be playing this in their living rooms with their PlayStation 5s. I don't know what else to say, except the one thing I think you should know is in the final the image I'm showing here, is if you look very closely at the lenses, you can even see the eye tracking assembly built in. It's actually the same as the HTC Vive Pro Eye that I have here. On the HTC Vive Pro Eye and a lot of other IR-based infrared eye-tracked headsets, they have these little black dots around the lenses, and those emit IR, and they'll have a IR camera around that assembly to actually see the reflections of the IR in your pupils and your white parts of your eyes. Basically is how eye tracking works. So it's cool you can see that even in this, which it's not really a render, it's just a very overly photoshopped version of what you're going to see. Now, I heard recently a rumor that they plan to release this device in Q1 of 2023. Yeah, I don't know where this rumor came from. However, from what I understand and heard from sources in China, and Ming-Chi Kuo, who is a very popular supply chain analyst, would agree with this, is that the PlayStation VR 2 is very close to mass production, if it's not already within this month. And them hoarding a bunch of supply to release in Q1 of next year, I personally doubt it. Companies don't usually like to do that. They usually like to trickle things out. And like when you reach mass production, it's usually like 1 or 2 months right after you can start giving them to consumers. So I'm personally not a believer in this this Q1 2023. I still kind of think that we might actually see the PSVR 2 start have pre-orders available within the next couple of months, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see a event showing off the headset in its full glory with some launch content and software within the next 2 months as well. Maybe even this month. I would not be shocked at all. Because again, when factory lines say they're going, it's very rare for companies to say no, stop, don't do it. You know, so because that doesn't look good for their bottom line. Oh, anyway, that was my news video for this week. I know it was a very long one. Thank you for sticking with me. And that's yeah, it was just so much going on this week, and there was stuff I even cut out from this news segment. I don't know how long this video is going to be, but I'm sure it's going to make people very nervous when they see that number. Anyway, if you want to support me, you can go to bradsmells.com/Patreon, subscribe to me there so I can keep doing this more often. And that's pretty much it. Bye.